Welcome to our first lecture in EESC 418. We're going to start with some basic grammar, and we're going to start right with the very basics here, the subject and the predicate. You may or may not remember this from probably grade 5, but the subject and the predicate are the two components that make up a full sentence. So the subject is the person or thing doing an action, and the predicate is the phrase containing the verb or what is being done. So I've shown a few examples here. The subject in green, the lake. The lake is the subject. The predicate was formed by glaciers. So it's usually a verb phrase, and the subject is usually a noun with some sort of description attached to it. So the lake was formed by glaciers. Ozone can be harmful in the lower and mid troposphere. The earth-filled dam that holds back the river collapsed. And the reason I've chosen these sentences is to show that there is no length for a subject or predicate. Either can be one word or a long string of words. It's really about the idea of what is being expressed by each. So the subject is the person or thing doing an action, and the predicate is the action along with maybe a description of that action. Moving on, let's talk about the dependent and independent clauses. And these are important because they will affect a number of the grammatical errors that we're going to be talking about to come. So when we're talking about comma splices and fused sentences or run-on sentences, we need to know what a dependent and an independent clause is. So let's start with the definition. So an independent clause contains a subject and a predicate, just like the sentences I showed on the previous slide, and an independent clause can stand alone as its own sentence. So an independent clause can make up a whole sentence. It does not need a dependent clause with it, but often a dependent clause is included in the same sentence because it gives further information. So a dependent clause, also known as a subordinate clause, aka means also known as. So this is also known as a subordinate clause. And the reason it has these names is because it depends on what's in the independent clause, or it expresses a subordinate idea or a secondary idea. So a dependent clause cannot stand alone as a sentence. I'm showing a sentence on the right with an independent clause, also shown as orange, just like the definition. Most shield volcanoes are found at mantle plumes. So this has a subject, which is most shield volcanoes, and a predicate, which is are found at mantle plumes. So this is an independent clause. It can stand as its own sentence. The dependent clause shown here, this is a common mistake that people make. They'll put a dependent clause starting with for example, and then listing a noun without a verb and calling that a complete sentence. So this is a dependent clause that depends entirely on the preceding sentence. It cannot stand on its own. So there's a couple of ways to correct this. And throughout my slides, I'll show an incorrect sentence bordered by red and a correct sentence bordered by green. So the easiest way to correct this is simply to add a verb or a predicate to the second sentence. The Kilauea volcano in Hawaii is one such example. So the way I've fixed these two sentences is to make the second sentence an independent clause, and the way I've done that is to add a predicate to the sentence which is missing one. So for example, the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii, which is not a standalone sentence, can become a standalone sentence by adding the predicate, which I've added as is one such example. Another way to fix this is to simply change the wording, keeping it a dependent clause but fusing it to the previous independent clause to form a complete sentence. Most shield volcanoes are found at mantle plumes, comma, such as the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii. Now we have an independent clause plus a dependent clause in the same sentence. And as I've shown on the left, when a dependent clause is combined with an independent clause to form a sentence, the comma separates the two clauses. And if you're wondering how to tell an independent clause from a dependent clause, you can simply cover up half of the sentence and see if the remaining half stands on its own. So if we look at the bottom right sentence and we cover up the first part, we're left with, such as the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii. This is not a complete sentence which indicates to us that it is a dependent clause. If we cover up the second half, the remaining text says, most shield volcanoes are found at mantle plumes. The comma here could be replaced with a period, leaving a full sentence. So this is an independent clause. I've left a few links to some more sites which describe the difference between dependent and independent clauses. Please go read those and then come back to the next part, which will rely on this information.